I'm Tamara from Tamara's Joy, and today we are going to learn how to make coasters. These are a really easy project. If you are a beginner sewer, I highly recommend checking out this tutorial. I will walk you through every little step that you need to know to make these coasters, and you will learn beginner basics along the way. So let's jump into that tutorial. To make our coaster, you will need 2 pieces of fabric, 5 inches by 5 inches for the front of your coaster and for the back of your coaster. And then you'll also need a piece of batting cut at 5 inches by 5 inches. For our coaster, we are going to sew our seams at a 5/8 seam allowance. So the first thing that we'll do is lay out our fabric. To lay out our fabric, we want it to be right sides facing in. So we're going to face both of these pieces of fabric towards each other. So we've got both of those wrong sides facing out. And then we will also put our batting at the back of one of those pieces. Don't worry, that batting is not going to end up on the outside of our project. All right, so I've pinned around our entire piece, but one of these sections we will need to leave open and not sew across. That way we can turn our project right side out. So to make sure that I don't forget to sew across that project, I will take a pin and I will actually put the pin in the fabric this way. That way when I get to this section, I will remember, oh, yeah, not sewing across this part. So we are going to start our project right here. So take that project, make sure that your threads are going towards the back of your machine. You've got a nice long tail. And we will, sometimes because our needles are in our way, it's harder to get your project under that sewing foot. A lot of sewing machines will allow you to lift that presser foot up even higher and then put it back down so that it's not stuck on anything. So now that we've got our fabric nicely lined up, I can take that one pin out because it's not going to be needed anymore. And I want to put my sewing needle down. So put your sewing needle down. Sew a few stitches forward. I'm going to sew a few stitches backward, and that has created my nice little knot. Then you are going to sew towards your corner, but don't sew all the way towards your corner. This part can get a little complicated and it's easier to use your hand wheel. So we want to pivot and do our corner. So make sure your needle is down inside your fabric and you are thinking that this is about 5/8 of an inch. You can use a measurement to make sure. I have a little measuring gauge here, and this little measuring gauge lets me see if my needle is at about 5/8 for that corner. So it looks to be about 5/8. I'm going to make sure my needle is down, lift my presser foot up, and then pivot the fabric. And if it's at the right width, you'll see that your fabric is lining up against the next 5/8 line. If it's not perfect, it does not matter. If you went too far, what you can always do is go back and do one back stitch. That way you can start at the spot that you want so that this is a 5/8 seam allowance. So I'm going to take that pin out so I don't sew over it, and we are going to continue on down the line. Keep your eye on the side of that fabric. Don't watch the needle, and make sure to take those pins out. Now use your hand wheel if you're coming to the edge. That way you don't end up going too far. I think I might need to do one more stitch, but I'm just going to check. Yeah, I'm too far past that seam allowance. So I just want to do one stitch, so I'm just going to move forward with my hand wheel. And then there we are, I've got my 5/8 seam allowance. Okay, so I'm happy with where I am here, but I just want to show you if you go one too far, so you've gone that extra stitch length past, and you come this way and you're like, oh no, I've gone too far. It's okay, just go back and then do one back stitch, and you can start where you want to start. So now you're nicely lined up. Now, as you can see, I'm coming up to this needle point here, and that's because I want to keep this section open to about 3 inches in width. Now, because we're doing a small coaster, it might end up being 2 inches, but I'm going to sew to about where this needle is. I don't want to sew on the needle though. All right, so I'm getting to that spot. I'm going to back stitch. And then take my project out. So we've got that open section right there. Snip those extra threads away, and we've got our nice little square. Now, before we turn this right side out, what we'll do is we'll actually cut away the excess to our corners. And by doing that, you're reducing bulk, and so you'll have a crisper point on the other side. But be careful, you don't want to snip over those sewn threads. And now it's time to turn this right side out. So you're just going to reach inside your project and you'll flip it out. Now, you can use your fingers to point those little corners out, or you can use the end of a chopstick to get it nice and pointy. But if you are using the end of a chopstick or anything like the end of a pencil or something to get those nice crisp points, just make sure that you're not pushing so hard that this little point pops out. So you do have to be a little bit careful with that. And then I'm going to take this to the iron and I'm just going to press it flat. And when you press it flat, you're going to fold these little flaps inside. That way you can pin it shut once you've pressed it flat. All right, so we're almost there, and now we just want to do a top stitch around our entire coaster. So for myself, I want my top stitch to look a little bit longer than your normal stitch. So I'm just going to extend my stitch length a little bit. And then I'm going to start in the middle. And the reason why we start in the middle instead of on a corner is because it's easier to get going. I'm also going to line the edge of my fabric to the edge of my sewing foot this time. And the reason for that is it makes it easy to follow along the side of your sewing foot, but you're also closer in, so you will catch the open section of your coaster and you'll be able to sew it shut. Put my needle down, sew forward a few stitches, hit that back button, so I've done my back stitch, and now we are going to sew all the way around the entire coaster. I'm going to get fairly close to that edge. I'll probably use my hand wheel here. That way, when I turn it, you can see it's still lined up along the side of my sewing foot. Now see here, I've gone too far. I don't like that. Now, if I was paying attention and I would have gone a little slower, that wouldn't have happened, but either way, I'm going to go back stitch 1, and I'll go down. That actually was 2. Goodness. Okay, moving forward 1, and now I'm nicely lined up again. And we'll go around. Now, if you end up getting stuck on your fabric, what you can do is you can take your stiletto or a long pointy needle or chopstick and push your fabric into those feed dogs that are underneath. And by doing that, the feed dogs will be able to catch your fabric and then they'll move on through again. So that will happen the closer you are to the edge. When you come to the corner, it can get stuck because there's a lot of extra fabric there. All right, that's not perfect, but in my opinion, it's good enough. You never want to start on a corner because then you really will get stuck in the fabric. All right, so we've gone around the entire thing and we've got our top stitch around it and we've closed our opening, which is good. So as you can see, these peach threads, it makes it a little bit easier to see your longer stitch. Here I went a little bit too far, so I back stitched, which is why you see that little extra stitch there. So when you're moving towards your corners, pay attention, that way you don't actually have to go backwards. When you're doing our previous step all the way around, it really doesn't matter because you're not going to see that little error. But on our top stitch, it's a little bit more noticeable, unless of course you use a thread that blends, then you won't notice that much at all. And that, my friends, is everything you need to know to learn how to make your own coasters. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss future tutorials. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.